Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Neuroqueering Podcast. I'm your host, Pasha Marlowe. I'm calling this my 100th episode, but also my 34th. The reason being because I rebranded my original podcast, which was called Let Pleasure Be the Measure. And then I rebranded it as Neuroqueering because I evolve. Thank goodness. We learn, we unlearn, we do better as we learn. And now I'm realizing after 34 neuroqueering episodes that what I really need to do is talk about accessibility. So I went on to see how many episodes total I've done, and this is 100. And I said, on my 100th episode of podcasting, I want to bring my favorite content creator and the person who has inspired me to transition my work from specifically neurodiversity to much broader accessibility. And that person is Jamie Shields. And I met Jamie through LinkedIn. And at 3 in the morning, when I am insomniatic, if that's a word, in my ADHD-ness trying to fall asleep, which never works, and in my autism wanting to research everything and learn everything under the sun before the sun rises, I see Jamie's posts first thing. And they're always insightful and authentic and clear and kind and thought-provoking. And I am so glad to have Jamie Shields here with us today. So welcome, Jamie.
Thank you so much. That was a really good intro. And if you see my face right now, I'm just beaming. Um, that was a really good intro. I hope I can live up to that.
You already have your posts speak for themselves, and you're so good at what you do, bringing your own lived experience into your posts, but also how clearly you teach people. It's really unique, I think.
Thank you so much. Like honestly, for me, like content is it started like a Dear Diary moment. So I was just posting randomly. And then it kind of just escalated. And now I'm like when people say to me, you teacher or you're a thought leader, I'm like, I'm just over here doing my Dear Diary moment and loving Canva. So it's thank you so much.
Yeah, but I've been told that too. You're a thought leader. I'm like, okay, I'm just thinking. I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking, but if you want to call me a thought leader, that's fine. So here we are, two thought leaders, and I'm going to make, I'm sure, all the mistakes so that other people can learn from their own mistakes on how to be inclusive and accessible, or how not to be. And so, to start off. Well, first of all, I foolishly, I didn't even give a proper intro as to like exactly who you are, but I'm going to let you do that because you do that better than me because you know you. So, Jamie Shields, what would you like to say about yourself to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, of course. So, hi, my name's Jamie, in case you haven't worked that out yet. I describe myself as a registered blind AuDHD rhino because A, rhinos are chubby unicorns, and B, because I am reclaiming language that was used against me. Being a gay man, I used to get asked, "Where's my unicorn?" Which sounds lovely, but was actually meant to be really insultative. Obviously, in my head, unicorn's quite slim. So I was like, I'm not a unicorn, I'm a rhino. So I'm reclaiming that language. I'm registered blind since birth. I was later diagnosed as an adult, was autistic and ADHD. And if you can't tell with my lovely strong accent, I am based in the not so sunny Belfast, Northern Ireland. And I suppose just a little snapshot of what I do. I usually preface that by saying, what don't I do? Because if you ask me to do something, I'm like, yes, let's do it. But for me, so I work full time with a global recruitment company, and I support clients, particularly their clients, to make inclusive, accessible change. Thus, through their recruiting processes, that's creating cultures that foster belonging, and at times it's helping them attract disabled talent or neurodiverse talent. And then on the side of that, because we know working in corporate things don't happen overnight, and ADHD is like, I want to do more. So
Mhm.
I have my own self side hustle. You say side hustle in corporate because you don't want to scare them, say a business. So I have a side hustle which is disabled by society, which is exactly what I've been my whole life. So that's a little snapshot of me. I'm a speaker, trainer, consultant, and I talk way too much.
Oh no, no, that's perfect. That's perfect. I love it, and I'm so happy to know the background of the rhino. I've never understood why Jamie uses a rhino, and now I know. Love that you reclaimed that, took your power back on that one.
Yes.
Is it useful? And I know this is a podcast, but I'm also doing a video and uploading it to YouTube. Is it useful to like image descriptions, give a description of ourselves?
Yes, well, if it's on video, let's do that. So, do you want to go first? Or do you want me to go first?
You go and then because then I'll learn how to do it.
Okay, so a visual description, just for anyone who doesn't know, is it's just a quick way to describe yourself. And it's, if for somebody who, like me, is maybe registered blind or visually impaired, or maybe somebody who's not paying attention to the screen, is being distracted, you're helping create that mental picture of how you look. So I'm probably going to be way kinder to myself. So I am a white male with short dark hair, which has been hairsprayed within an inch of his life to set up neatly at one side. I have blue eyes. I have a short dark beard. And I am wearing a lovely navy blue fluffy jacket that is making me look very puffy out. And I'm sat in my office. And I talk a lot with my hands. So if you hear slap, that's me slapping my microphone. But yes, that is a visual description of me.
Excellent, excellent. And I am a 53-year-old white woman. Half of my hair right now is blonde and half of it's brown because ADHD. I get bored. And I'm wearing very sparkly glasses, sparkly earrings, and sparkly jacket in gold because autism, I like the AU, which is gold in the elements. So a little nod to autism. And I have a rainbow background because I identify as queer, autistic, ADHD, completely quirky. And I love bringing color as much as possible into my life because I feel like it's hard to access pleasure and joy. I know this is not part of the image description. I just went on a tangent, but for me, I have a hard time accessing pleasure and joy. And so sometimes I do it through my color. And anyhow, that's why I have the colorful background.
But it's true though. It's so expressive. Color's the best thing to do. Like if you're angry at somebody, you can turn up in like a really neutral or like dark outfit to express that. Or if you're going to be happy, like I don't know, maybe this I won't be reading this, but I definitely do. Like socks, particularly. I'm like, I want to wear happy socks if I'm going to do something fun. But if I'm going to something serious, I'm going to wear really boring socks.
Oh, that's so true. And you made one of my favorite graphics, the shoes, right? The
Yes.
DEI of shoes. I don't know if that's what I've been calling it, but where, well, do you want to explain it? Because you made it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a graphic that I made, and to be honest, it's blew up twice because the first time I posted it, I like all my content, it's just thoughts, you know what I mean? Like we know what it's like with ADHD, you have so
Yeah.
much going on in your head. So for me, like when I create graphics, it's like let's brain fart this onto page, make sure there's no typos if I can, and then let's create something magical from it. So when I came into the DI space, it was about 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago. I'm a disabled person, and in DI, you hear all these buzzwords like diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, acceptance, all these words float around. And when you try to think of that, how it means to you as an individual, people tell me so many different things. I was like, but I don't feel like that. I don't feel like that. And being myself, I like to break things down, dissect them to make it as digestible as possible. Not only is it just easier for me, but it's easier when I can communicate them because otherwise you go down rabbit holes, you hear my whole life story. I throw the kitchen sink at you when I'm answering one question. So
Yeah.
for me, it was a way to dissect these terms that we hear. And it kind of was from a book I'd read, so Birds of All Feathers. And now that I'm talking about it, I can't remember the book's name, but Google it. It's called Birds of All Feathers. And it's basically a book by DI. And the person had said, diversity is everybody getting a different pair of shoes. And I
Mm.
love this so much. And I was like, how can I add to this? How can I add to this? So then I started adding like equity is everybody getting a pair of shoes that fits them. Because as we know, if you get a size 10 shoe and you're a size 8, you can't get into them. So you've got equal treatment because you've got a pair of shoes, but you can't get into them. And then belonging is wearing the shoes that you want without fear of judgment. These terms have kind of changed. So I've released it twice. The first time that was like my thoughts then. Then I shared it again 2 years later because A, I didn't put a logo on it the first time. When it went viral, people were taking credit for it. And I was like, I did this. And I was like, I don't mind you sharing it, but don't take credit, please, because I put so much work into it. And I made it accessible, and people were posting it inaccessible. So there was that element of it. So I posted it again to put the logo on there and to bring it into brand. But again, just to show that these feelings that we have within the DI space, they're not static, they change, particularly the likes of belonging. You can feel belonging in work one day or belonging in a certain situation, but the very next moment, something can happen. Like if you're disabled, you may encounter a barrier, somebody may say the wrong thing, and that belonging suddenly shifts, so it does. You suddenly don't feel so much like you belong. So it's just really a way for me to express my thoughts, but then people started saying it's a definition, and I'm like, please don't say this is a definition, because this is only one disabled guy's view on it, and there's so much more. This is a conversation starter, not the definition.
Yes, yes, and it did. It started some really brilliant conversations. It made me think a lot about belonging, and sometimes I talk about neurobelonging, which because I want to. Sometimes people talk about belonging in terms of fitting in or having other people accept them, for instance, at work. And I feel like it's quite an inside job that we need to feel belonging inside of ourselves so that we can belong anywhere, really, even if the outside world is not accepting or, making things accessible for us.
100%. And I think when you are used to having to navigate in a world that is already disabling you, that you already feel excluded in, and you're already masking, it's like, how do you know what belonging actually feels like if you're constantly having to mask? So for me, this is why this graphics changes, because I still wear a mask a lot of the times in certain situations, even at work, like when I'm burnt out, or if I'm sitting there and somebody said something I don't agree with, and my neurodivergent brain's going, just ignore it. But my autism's like, no, you have to crack down on this. So it's like those feelings just fluctuate. So I love that you talk about your belonging, because I think we take for granted, two of us in neurodivergent, we're both autistic, but we take for granted when we speak to people who don't have the lived experience, and we talk about belonging. And it's true, the preface and the responsibilities pushed on to you as an individual, when really for me, I'm like, well, actually, DI's on the business. The only thing that's up to us is how we show up.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And DEI is having a rough go at the moment.
Oh,
and just reduced funding and misinterpretations
yes.
all over the place. And so what I'm seeing as I guess, trend in business right now is that organizations and corporations are still paying for trainings and speakers to come talk about specific aspects, which is still DEI, but they're calling it something else. So, like leaning into accessibility or neurodiversity.
Yeah.
There's a lot of organizations who are now starting neurodiversity hiring practices. And
Yes.
I a few years ago still had a far too narrow view as to what that should mean. And now I'm realizing that it's completely misinterpreted, and that I put under the neurodivergent umbrella far more than, of course, ADHD and autism and dyslexia or cognitive differences. I believe under that is so much more, including anything that probably could be labeled disorder, mental health struggles, disability. And I think once you start to diverge from neuronormativity, right behind that is heteronormativity and cisnormativity and ableism, and you start to unravel everything. Did you have that experience where once you started to question or queer or diverge from ableism, for example, that everything else, like capitalism, colonialism, and everything just started to unravel in front of you? Did you sense that?
Yeah, I tell everybody, like, everyone asks me, it's like, what's it like working in DI? Or I have people message me and be like, what made you want to get into it? And firstly, I'm like, I didn't get into this role. I never knew this was a thing. I just stumbled into it because I was shouting about my lived experience after being silenced for so long. But I think for me, it's like, I tell people, it's like, I feel like a cat sometimes who's got this ball of yarn. And I'm, do you know, like when a cat's playing with a ball of string or yarn and it's coming out looser and looser? And
Yeah.
that's kind of like DI is, because you find like one inaccessible barrier with an organization, and then you start to dive into it and you look at the language, you're like, well, that's completely ableist, or well, actually, that's rather sexist, or this is rather discriminatory. And this is why we talk about intersectionality and the importance of intersectionality, because people still see it and companies still do it. within the DI space, they look at DI as through one lens. But we're going to focus on gender this year. We're going to focus on sexuality for this month. They look at these milestone dates or these calendar dates, and it's so rigid in what they're doing. It's like, oh well, you can't be a black disabled gay person, or you can't be a Asian lesbian lady or single parent. There's none of this consideration, and this is why intersectionality needs to be at the heart of it. And it's what really drives me is because I didn't know when I came into DI. I'm a white disabled man, so I am. So there's privilege in that. But equally, I think that's what I think is the biggest challenge of DI is how do you get people who, particularly those who have struggled to belong, how do you get those people to feel like they belong, but equally accept that privilege? Because how do you accept your privilege when you feel like you are being excluded constantly? So I had a lot of unlearning to do myself, but I think DEI is when you get to that point where you realize actually this all intersects, and if you can't fix one piece of the puzzle without coming to fix it all.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, I think intersectionality should be at the root of all
Yeah.
framework. And ERGs, the employee research,
Yes.
I believe, are often quite compartmentalized. And I
Yep.
always wondered why there weren't more intersectional ERGs, or if they even. I like the idea of it to bring people together to offer specific resources and community, but then sometimes I wonder if it actually also excludes further, and makes people have to choose. Well, am I in the neurodiversity or the LGBTQ or the BIPOC?
Yep.
And what if I'm in all of them? Like now, do I have to go to three different new meetings a week? Like what's going on here, right?
And like some companies have like up to 15 ERGs. And it's like if I wanted to attend all of them, it's like that's a lot of time. That's 15 hours a week if I was going to a meeting each week or 15 hours a month. No employer is going to be like, yeah, go ahead, go to that 15 hours a month. Over the course of a year, I'm not going to do that, Baz, because my ADHD, numbers do not get on in my head. So it's like, how do we get to a point where we create space that is intentionally inclusive rather than trying to deliberately make it inclusive? Because I think there's a difference between I don't want to say it's tick boxing, but a lot of times with ERGs, I think companies see it as a tick box. It's like, right, we've done this. We've created a community for our Black employees or neurodivergent colleagues or disabled colleagues. Tick, tick, tick. But
Yeah.
there's no kind of then, well, how do we bring these groups together and how are these actually collaborating and feeding into each other? Because I think that's what it's about. It's about making this part of a BAU, so we're not having to have the same conversations every year. And I think that's what DI goes wrong, is I think we just get so focused on tick boxing. And also the problem is so many companies have white leaders and there's no representation. So for them, it's clear why it's been seen as tech boxing because those people we need with the lived experience at the top just aren't there.
Absolutely. When I speak with organizations, and often they'll have me come in to talk to the ERGs, it could be an empowering training, and everyone could say, oh, good, now I know to ask for accommodations. Now I understand about accessibility and inclusive language. But they might still be scared. There might still not be the psychological safety, for example, to go to their manager or
Yep.
to the CE suite to ask, because there's still the fear that there will be negative consequence or firing or stigma or discrimination or bullying and on and on. And so it has to come from the top. But then I always,
Yep.
until it is their own lived experience with someone they know or love, how do you get people in leadership, people with power and privilege, to care about something like disability, even though we all know that we will all be disabled at some point, permanent, temporary, situational, like this is, it's not something that people will not never have an experience of, but how do you get them to care until it is their lived experience or someone that they know and love? What is your thought on that?
I think as somebody who has I spent all my life being struggling with employment, struggling to kind of find that all singing, all dancing employer. And like I had more jobs and hot dinners in my early 20s and late 20s. So the employer that I'm in at the moment, I've been here 4.5 years. This is my longest employment. And for me, I think I got rather lucky. And again, that word privilege comes in because I was privileged because it's not often a disabled person gets into employment and somebody stops to actually listen. And that's what happened to my current employer. And that's why I've ended up doing what I do today. But I think for me, I was blue in the face. Like I was screaming and shouting. I don't want to say that I was throwing my toys around me, but I was exploding because I just wanted to be employed. I wanted an income. So for me, I think what made it different for me was I was at rock bottom when I started my employer, so I was, and I was so vulnerable for the first time in my life. And I can remember in my interview, and they said to me, you know, is there any adjustments or anything we can do to support you? And I kind of just looked at them and I was just like, what do you mean? Like, did they know? Like, kind of freaking out. Oh my God, they know I'm disabled. Oh my goodness. But it was that power shift where it was actually like, well, what do you need to empower you? And usually companies come at it from a risk angle, don't they? When they look at anything within DEI, not just disability, it's always a risk. We educate about risk. If you don't hire a disabled person or if you don't give them the job, you're going to get taken to court. It's just like, well, that's the last thing we want to have to do. Or if you don't hire this disabled person, they're going to get angry and post about us online. That's not going to happen unless you've done something to warrant that behavior. So for me, I think it was that vulnerability. And for the first time, I kind of was just being really open and saying, do you know what, this doesn't work. This isn't working because of X, Y, Z. But like I said, I like to dissect things. So I was dissecting things to try to make it relatable to this person. And so my whole approach to how because like I used to go to situations or leaders and I used to shout and be angry. And if they didn't listen, I'd throw a storm. But now in this employment, I'm just going to be myself. I'm going to be open and I'm going to try to take what they say with a pinch of salt because I didn't realize we don't educate about DI. Like we don't educate what it's like to be a disabled person. In education, disabled people are excluded. And so we're taught in the back of our head that we exclude disabled people. This is a normal thing to do. But equally, we don't learn about racism correctly. Like I'm in Belfast, Northern Ireland. I never learned about racism at school. I didn't know what racism was until I was in my late 20s when I myself went and spoke to people who were black and brown, people who weren't white. And I think that's the problem is we don't educate. And so we always come in from this really,
Mhm.
I think like this really strict standpoint, like you need to do this, when really the company doesn't understand because that CEO has never actually had this conversation before. So I think dissecting things down to a level that people get is such a big benefit. And I know we shouldn't say you should sell the benefits. I hate that. I really don't think there's a benefit apart from making people realize, particularly with disability or even with any kind of marginalization. But the thing that's something a marginalized person is having those real people share lived experience that just hits home. So it does for a lot of people. So for me, when I now educate about disability, I talk about like it's part of the human experience, and I explain to them, as you said, anybody can acquire disability at any given time. In fact, 80% of disabled people acquired that disability later in life, as opposed to 20% like me who were born with it. So I think it's bringing those things home and dissecting to the point where that person has to buy in because they can relate to it. That's, I think, well, I don't know if I've answered the question or if I've opened up more questions, but I think it's about dissecting things to make it down to that person's level. How will they take this information? Do
Yes.
they need a whole song and dance? Do they need somebody to share a lived experience? Or do they just need to see the impact themselves? So for me, the way I approach it now is try to dissect everything and understand that we aren't educated about this. So yes, get angry that this company isn't doing this, but equally don't hold it against one singular person because that singular person uh, doesn't have a clue most of the time. And I know it sounds terrible. I hope it doesn't sound.
I hear what you're saying, and two things I'm pulling out to talk further about. One is how impactful and relatively easy it is for somebody to just ask how you identify, ask what your
Yep.
support are, ask what they need to understand to help you thrive. And I think sometimes that's just missed. There's a
Yep.
lot of assumptions. But you also mentioned anger, and I remember you posted like that it's okay to get angry, and that our anger, often fuels the
Yep.
but that how frustrating it must be, that it's this process. I mean, slow doesn't even sound like the proper word for the speed of this progress. It's beyond slow.
Like 100%. And like I think and I always relate things back to disability because this is my lived experience coming through. Because I was like, yeah, I'm an only expert in my own lived experiences. I would never try to speak for every disabled person or everybody else who's neurodivergent or autistic or gay or anything else that I share in that experience. I can only speak for myself. And I think for me, particularly in this space, I think it's about finding that anger and turning it into something positive because I have been angry. I'm still so angry. Oh my goodness, I hold so much anger. I carried so much internalized ableism. because of what I thought that disability was, because what society made me feel. So I had all this kind of feeling around what it was to be disabled. And people were like, you shouldn't get angry if somebody does a mistake. And I'm like, but why? Because my anger then makes me have a conversation with that person. It's just like, well, why did you say that? Why do you think that? Let's have a conversation and flip the narrative. So I'm like, we look at anger as if it's this really bad emotion, like you're going to turn into he Hulk or she Hulk or they Hulk. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. That we don't turn green because we get angry. In fact, a lot of great, especially in the arts community, look at some of the paintings out there. Like, I'm pretty sure a lot of Andy Warhol's or like Roy Lichtenstein's paintings have been done under anger. Same as many artists. And it's like there can be beauty from anger and there can be learning from it. So that's what I personally think. Because when somebody asks me what motivates me to do what I do, it was my anger. My
That's
graphics is my brain fart of everything I've thought.
rage through graphics.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense, and I think probably all thought leaders started from feeling a lot and getting angry about something, an injustice out in the world.
Yeah.
Um, and so, what would be so only in the last year? This is embarrassing, and you helped me so much understand the importance of like alt text and image descriptions, and I think back to why. Well, first of all, I wasn't aware that I should initially, and then when I became aware that that's a good way to become more accessible in my content, I ADHD, perhaps an excuse or an explanation, not an excuse. Sometimes I would just forget, and then I
Yeah.
would feel so terrible that I forgot that I would say, should I delete that post? Here I'm posting about neurodiversity and inclusion and equity, and then I'm not putting an image description, and then I think I'm such a hypocrite. I have no business posting at all. And I go down that road, which I think is a common experience because
Yeah.
you think, how do we make this accessible? Even sometimes I'll say the phrase, which probably is overused, everyone wants to be seen, heard, and known. That's a quite ableist phrase now, I think, but it's very common. And I'm like, what am I saying? And then I'm thinking, how can I reframe this? And then I start thinking, everything I say is
Yeah.
ableist. I should say nothing. I should just sit back and be quiet and listen. And yet I have a lot I want to say. So I'm stuck in this place. So I'm just wondering what your take is on that, how you would suggest people navigate flubbering through, if that's even a word, and making mistakes along the way, but still trying.
Yeah, and I think, and what I would say is, don't stop being silent because of that ever. Like, don't ever stop yourself because I think we have to. Again, it comes back to that. Like I talked about anger and I'm about to talk about kindness. It's all the emotions here. But I think you have to be kind to yourself because again, if we look at society and the very design of society, if we go back to education, we don't learn about accessibility. We don't learn about ableism. If as adults, if I said to you the word racism, we know that's discrimination. We know that's discrimination on people based off their skin color, their skin tone. And when we talk about sexism, we know that is discrimination against sexes. Sorry, I tried to say that word there and completely stumbled. And then if we talk about homophobia, we know that's discrimination against gay people, transphobia, trans people, so on and so forth. There's a lot we can go through there. But when we use this word ableism, if you look at the very definition of ableism, its language is a lot softer. So it is. It doesn't actually say it's discrimination in any kind of legal definition or in any kind of dictionary definition. It talks about less favorable treatment. So ableism isn't viewed as this discrimination of disabled people because that's essentially what it is. It's discrimination of disabled people, but it comes in all forms, as we know, just like every other kind of ism or every other kind of discrimination. There's just a softer approach, and it's because we don't educate about it. You know, if you asked a disabled person, a room of 10 disabled people who didn't know each other, what is ableism? You'll get 10 different answers. You'll
Mhm.
also get 10 different experiences of what they think ableism is, because we ourselves, as disabled people, we're not educated about it. We experience it every single day, but we aren't educated. So society systemically has a problem with ableism because still today, this day, we do not educate about what it is. We rely on content creators talking about it. Workplaces don't cover it in trainings. Schools still don't really touch about ableism. And in fact, the dictionary definition is still exactly the same. It's less favorable treatment. So I would say don't be too hard on yourself if you're questioning your language because we're all going to make mistakes. I make mistakes every other day. Like yesterday, I think even when we talked before this, I was telling you my dogs are crazy. And then now when I sit and think that, I'm like, well, that was a very ableist thing for me to say because that's ableist language. And it's like, we just have to be a bit kinder to ourselves in those situations because we're trying to navigate this less favorable treatment. We'll not use the word discrimination. We're trying to navigate this less favorable treatment that's ingrained in our language. It's ingrained in our behaviors. It's ingrained in the way that we design, we communicate. We just aren't aware. So I think it's about being open. If somebody says to you, well, that was actually ableist, find out why, learn that there, and try to remember it. You're not going to get it right every single time. We don't have the resources like we have on racism. And I'm not saying there's no racism because we know racism is very much alive. But most of us could point to a really great resource or an organization or a group of content creators who would be able to support this person or trainers. We don't have that for ableism. Even when I've posted about ableism online, I've had other disabled creators come back to me and be like, you're being too harsh on people. You need to stop that. And I'm like, but when somebody talks about racism, we don't come down on them and tell them they're being harsh or back to that angry narrative. You're angry for talking about this. So ableism is ingrained everywhere. I think we just have to accept that. It'll not change in our lifetimes. We'll maybe see a shift towards some of the language around inclusive language, and that's amazing. And I think the fact that you can check your own self, as you did earlier, and I've done for myself, I think it's important to do those checks, but equally go easy on yourself because we're all learning in this space. And I think until we see more resources, an absolute spoiler, me and a friend is working on I don't know if I'm allowed to tell anybody this, but I'm going to say it anyway. We're working on a book about ableism. And I know there's other people out there making books about ableism as well. So there's resources coming. We just haven't had them.
Yes, and starting with the definition itself, it isn't.
Yeah.
So somebody needs to, whoever writes the dictionary,
Yeah.
needs to be adopted. And it has been over time, great strides have been made in terms of racism and homophobia and transphobia and all the things. So we certainly have the ability to
Yeah.
change cultures and to change language and to become more inclusive. But
Oh,
yes,
100%. And so people call you woke for even mentioning ableism. It's like you don't even know what this means.
yeah,
Like where does this perception come from that to be woke is to be challenging the discrimination and the systemic challenges that we face because of a piece of our identity. And like I've always been really fascinated by this term woke because when you actually go back to look at the origins of this word and what it actually means, it's like white people have taken this word out of context that was used by black and brown people, and we twisted it to mean, well, you're just too sensitive. When in fact that is not the definition of that word at all. It's it's interesting, so it is. But again, I think we have that's why I advocate it's so hard to talk about it because if it resonates with one person or if one disabled person hears this and suddenly what they're feeling because what we don't see is the internalized ableism. Like we know what now we're talking about ableism, we know kind of a little bit more about it is, but we don't see what that does to that disabled person. Like it's psychological trauma. It is challenges your mental health, it is self-worth, it is feeling no empowerment. And for me, it was self-harming, it was binge drinking. And, so disclaimer, what's the word? What do you say when you're going to say so? Trigger warning, that's it. There we
yes.
go. ADHD could not find the word. Like, I had self-harm because of my internalized ableism. I had attempted suicide because I felt worthless as a person. And it's like we don't talk about this experience of internalized ableism. Doctors don't talk about it. Disabled people don't know about it. But once a disabled person learns about ableism and things start to unclick, it's like you start to realize how actually systemic it actually is. And a great example of that is Isaac Harvey. That's why I went down a rabbit hole. Isaac Harvey, he is incredible. He's a content creator. He is disabled. He is a black man. And he posted the other day about ableism, how he himself didn't really understand what it was. And Isaac is incredibly bold for standing up and saying, I didn't actually know what this is. I used to think it was X, Y, Z. But this is actually what it is. So it's interesting to see that even within the disabled community and from those quite high profile people within the community, that they themselves are still learning. Whereas I think for me, I had to learn because if I didn't, I don't know what I would have done or where I would have ended up, but finding out what ableism was did transform my life because I started to realize I'm not worthless because I'm disabled. Actually, it's the design of society that has disabled me.
Yes. And it is so good that content creators and leaders out there and thought leaders are bringing it to the forefront a little bit more and making mistakes and talking about how
Yep.
learning and unlearning as they go. And it feels like so much is within our language. And it's interesting, depending on which lens I'm looking through. Like if I'm looking through the mental health lens, I'm
Mhm.
very sensitive to how, like you said, ableist language is like saying my dogs are going crazy, like not using crazy. But
Yep.
then I've learned through a trauma-informed mental health lens that so much of our language is violent. Like rather than saying trigger
Yep.
warning, we should say something like this might activate you. I don't even remember what the alternative
Yep.
is. And then if I look at it through the lens of visual disability or auto and like I think or neurodiversity, I think, okay, I have to learn a whole new way of not just writing and talking, but thinking because the idioms, I guess, as well as just the language, it's so intertwined with able
Yep.
all throughout. And that could be daunting to think there's so much, and yet I think sometimes for me it's slowing down because I'm quite impulsive with my post. If I feel it, I write it, I say it, I post it, and then I'm like, whoops, I forgot three
Yep.
or a typo or left something out or I forgot to hashtag and I forgot to do the camel caps, which is something else that you taught me where you capitalize the beginning of each word. And I thought that those hashtags wouldn't show up in the algorithms because when you write them out, they don't show up on the
Yeah.
list of possible hashtags. And so I thought, there's that moment, this ethical dilemma. You're like, okay, this hashtag is more accessible, but if it doesn't work within the algorithm, then nobody will see it anyhow. And then I have this moment of what am I supposed to do? Maybe I'll do it both ways. And then I just do it both ways for a while. There's all these new rules and lessons that I'm still very much learning. But
It's because
go ahead.
it just changes your everyday creating content feels like second nature. Like I think when you create content as regular as we do, it's just it just pours out of you, and it's like before you've even thought about it, it's online, and you're like, wow, I didn't even get a chance to decompress, and it's on there. So like I get that, and what I would say is, especially with the hashtags, people with the algorithm, you're safe. Don't worry, you're safe with the algorithm. But it's just I think when you're having to challenge something that is so your bread and butter it becomes so much harder. Um, but I think it's trial and error, and I think it's why I would say be angry and let that motivate you, but be kind and let that influence you. Because when you be a little bit kinder on yourself, I think it's okay. Do you know what? I'm going to post something inaccessible once or twice. I'm going to say the wrong thing once or twice. But if somebody comes and tells me, well, actually, this was inaccessible, it's your response, I think, that makes the biggest impact because your response will either make somebody feel validated. And if somebody comes to you and says your language is in uninclusive there, which by the way, if you try to write uninclusive, it tells you it's the wrong word. So I think we need a word better for uninclusive. But I think when you tell somebody that, or they come and say it to you, thank them. Ask well, obviously, if you don't want to go into it, you don't have to go into it deeply. But if you wanted to have a conversation, could you give me some other pointers on how I could be less ableist? Because again, ableism is the definition is wrong. There's no real definition there. There will be at one point. I promise you, I will fight Oxford Dictionary to get it on or Harvard Dictionary, whoever it is I need to fight with. Um, but I think it's just accepting that you're going to get it wrong. But you have to be kind to yourself. There's no point beating yourself up because particularly if you are neurodivergent, I think what happens there is we're also really susceptible to imposticism, rejection sensitivity. And then when you add that into the mix of your own internalized ableism, it's a scary concept. So definitely do just, be open. It's how you respond to those lessons. And then once you learn it, as long as you're not doing it every single day, oh, I learned this on Monday, but I'm going to continue doing it for the next month. I think that's a different story. That's when you may get somebody angry shouting at you.
Right, right. Yes. And I think that's such a good point you brought up in terms of the intersectionality, because if I if I write something and it's and I used an ableist word or technique and somebody says that that was ableist, my initial instinct goes straight into I shouldn't even work. I shouldn't even
Yeah,
act.
my
Just
too.
honesty takes over. You know, like I have no business putting any content out there. And then I'm like, okay, Pasha, pause. Like this could be a learning opportunity, not just for me, but for others as to how I respond and react to this, person. And like you said, thank you. You know, how could I do it better? This comes up in language a lot around neurodiversity because
Yeah,
people neurodiverse instead of neurodivergent. People
yeah,
use neurodivergent as a synonym for autism. I've been
yeah,
talking to organizations about their neurodiversity hiring programs, which are not, by the way, include
yeah.
their autism hiring programs, and they're only hiring for tech jobs, and there's no management leadership or elevation
Yeah.
into, higher level executive positions at all. And that's exclusive, obviously. And
It's
so,
also ableist. That's ableist as well. It's like all autistic people are going to attack. I'm
what?
autistic and I'm terrible attack.
Terrible, terrible. Like that is a false. Like that's right. And so I get excited, and this is probably a common experience. I see neurodiversity hiring program, and I'm like, fantastic, finally. And I go online and it says search, jobs available. And it's tech, 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 tech. And I'm like, what? And those are not my gifts. And then I look a little bit deeper into the description. And more often than not, it talks about autism and sometimes autism, ADHD, dyslexia, but very rarely does it expand to, well, we can go on with a list that is so long, traumatic brain injury, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, like bipolar,
Dyspraxia.
dyspraxia, other, on and on and on. And then they'll say, we're fully inclusive or all inclusive. Sounds like a resort, all inclusive, bring your authentic selves, right?
Yes.
And then I'm like, oh, do you want me to bring my authentic, unmasked, self that has mental health struggles? Do you want me to bring, activation warning here to, suicidal ideation? Do you want me to bring that, or are you being performative? And are you saying you're inclusive because it's a tag word or whatever? And then we feel more excluded. Like the people they're
Yeah.
seemingly trying to include feel more excluded when it's not actually inclusive.
But
Um,
even when you have those conversations with those recruiters hiring for those roles as well, it's like, we're looking for a neurodiverse individual. It's like, well, you could hire anybody then because you're talking about everybody. So just go pick somebody, anybody. And then like I think that's the problem is I think companies, and I think this is I love the action that we're seeing around maybe action is the wrong word. I love the momentum we're seeing, particularly around neurodiversity, because companies are talking about it. We have so many more consultants with lived experiences, guiding companies, and it's like this is amazing. We needed this like way back when Judy Singer coined the term neurodiversity. We needed this way back then. But it's amazing the momentum we're seeing. But then equally, it's you see these companies jumping onto this performative, almost like I always say talking the talk and not walking the walk, because it's like it's complete lip service. And then if you even start to explore the job description, you there's so much ableism ingrained there as well. Because I know not everybody views being neurodivergent or being autistic as a disability, and that's the right to do so. But I think for myself, I very much identify that it is disabling in my life. I don't ever try to proclaim that I have superpowers because of my ADHD or my autism, because I really genuinely don't. Like, if I was going to pick a superpower, it would definitely not be to have wonky eyes and a brain that is either sped up or so fixated. So I think for me, it's like it's really recognizing. This is my train of thought kind of went off out the window there, but for me, it's about really recognizing that. Oh no, I've lost my train of thought there. I
uh,
went up the door.
well, you were saying that you don't identify as it being
Oh,
a power that
yes.
you it's just disabling your ADHD.
Yes. So, and then we have companies who are posting these adverts, and they're trying much taking the superhero narrative for the super. We want extraordinary, amazing people to come join our team who are autistic or who are neurodiverse or who are part of the neurodiversity community. I've seen that one, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
well that's it. That's
Every
everybody, but okay.
Yeah.
But and it's very strange because I think that's where we go wrong again, and this is where I think that ableism comes back into this practice, is because people don't realize that these performative things they're doing are actually quite ableist, and the job descriptions that they're writing to try to hire these individuals, whether they see themselves as disabled or not, is actually inherently ableist.
Yeah.
We see things like you must be able to work in a fast-paced environment, and it's just like, okay, but that doesn't really define what I'm doing in a role, and the fast-paced environment doesn't really speak to me. Or, for myself, one that I really don't like is must be able to overcome difficult challenges. And I'm like, what are the difficult challenges? Like, you're not talented. A lot of things can be a difficult challenge to me. Some days getting out of bed can be a difficult challenge for my thinking. So it's like, tell me, what is the challenge?
There needs to be much more specific. I applied to a DEI director job of all things, and I said, what is a daily snapshot of a day in this job?" And they said, "It's a little of everything." I'm like, "Okay. Am I sitting at a desk? Am I walking around town? Am I driving into work? Am I parking?" And they're just like, "Yeah, it's definitely a little bit of all that." I'm like, and at one point they said, "How are you going to deal with the bureaucracy around your autism?" And I'm like, "I don't understand the question. Like, what?" And it's like, "But this is a DEI job." I'm just kind of confused as to why there's so much like ableism and confusion in this interview alone. I said, I don't want this job. Like, this interview, like, is already a snapshot for me of what it would be like to work for your organization. And sometimes I don't notice it enough in the interview, and I notice it big time in the onboarding, because the onboarding is
Yep.
ridiculously complicated and overwhelming and disorganized. And I'm just like, this is not accessible. And so this happens often, which is why we probably go through so many jobs and careers, because if they say it's inclusive or accessible and then it's not, there's a lot of time and energy and spoons wasted in the mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think as well, I think that's the problem within corporate as well, is I don't think corporate DI has never really been inclusive of disability. We're now seeing these strides towards more inclusion, towards having conversations around accessibility, towards having how do we create an environment that is actually inclusive and accessible for everybody, for every neurodiverse individual. Because again, everybody's neurodiverse. And I think when we think about that and we look at what's actually happening, it's like corporate DI is not facilitating of disabled people, especially those who are neurodivergent or autistic. I still get told, and I'm not naming anybody, but I still get told all the time is, "Oh, well, your message came across as rude." And I'm like, no, my message is direct.
Yeah.
Or you're coming across as you have bad behaviors. And it's like, why? Because I expressed I didn't like something. And it's like, I think we have this, well, corporate has this mindset of how you should be in corporate. You should tick this box and you should fit into this square. And if you are any kind of different, yeah, we love it, but only this much we want to see it. So I think it's about, we need to see this transformation, understanding that actually the way that everything currently is designed, when we haven't taken in that lived experience of consultants, it's like we're just designing for the same people that we've always been designing for. Because until we actually have the people with lived experience helping design these processes behind those decisions of hiring, we're going to have the same problems. You're not designing or communicating in a way that is inclusive for everybody. And that's the biggest, I think, the biggest challenge we will see, and probably will continue to see in DI. And when we talked about the start of this recording about the current problems within DI at the moment, which I'm going to be honest, I think Elon Musk did a terrible tweet, but did a great job to get everyone to actually look at DI, because
Mhm.
I think even negative things can have positive impact, and I think that's the positive of that, is that we're seeing people having to really look in at themselves and say, actually, is this performative or is this actually making a difference? And I think that's amazing, but I want to see that same energy put in, because if we're going to be really honest about this current state of DI, it's never really been inclusive or accessible. So it's just like, that's why the conversations now are happening. And that's why it's paramount that we bring in those with lived experience like yourself, like me, just so many other people you could go to as well, but like really tap into that lived experience.
Yes. Yes. Yes to all that. I'm gonna allow that to be like the end comment, first because it was brilliant, but also because we both have to pee. And
Yes.
time limit on
Since
uh,
the start.
so Jamie, how do you prefer people reach out to you and connect with you?
Yeah, so you can visit my website if you want to look at what I do, if you want to work with me, which is www.disabledbysociety.com. Or if you want to check out my LinkedIn page, it's Disabled by Society, or check out my own LinkedIn page. Like honestly, whatever is easier, I'm everywhere. But yeah, just come say hello, whatever you want to do.
Nice, so good. All right, the 100th episode I have recorded, I am glad is on such a note that I want to expand more and learn more, and it's challenging and exciting, and there's so much growth left. So I don't know where this podcast will go in its rebranding, but I'm so thankful that you were the 100th recording. That feels like a big accomplishment for an ADHDer to even get to 100 of anything.
Oh, fair play to you. I've done like three podcasts in my life, and each time I'm like, I can't do this no more. So the fact you got to 100 is like a gold star. So brilliant. And I want to say your background, if you do a rebrand, keep that background. It's stunning. And I'm sure anybody watching the video will agree. It's so pretty.
Oh, thank you. I will. I'll keep my rainbow background for
Yeah.
my branding. Absolutely. And if anyone out there is listening and wants to connect with me, I'm also on LinkedIn on my name, Pasha Marlowe. My website, pashamarlowe.com. My email, pasha at Pasha Marlowe. I'm just going to keep everything easy for me to remember. So, yes, please reach out and I will see you when I figure out how to rebrand this podcast. And
Woohoo.
you, Jamie, on LinkedIn at 3 a.m. When you're just waking up in Ireland tomorrow morning. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for listening and watching wherever you are. And happy neuroqueering.